Now, to actually get to the Gobi, or the part of the desert that we wanted to get to, we actually had to take a plane from Shanghai to Lanzhou. And then from Lanzhou, we hopped on a high-speed train for another 4 or 5 hours to Zhangji, where we met our drivers. And of course, driving into the desert, or the locations that you want to get to, take 2 or 3 hours. So it's a long trip, but of course, if you want to go to these areas, then you have to put up with a little bit of traveling. And of course, another barrier of traveling in China is the language. If you don't speak the language, Cantonese or Mandarin, then you might have a little trouble because the direct translation doesn't work so well. So these were the two main reasons why we went on a tour with Alistair and Zhuanli: the language barrier, and of course, some of these areas are extremely difficult to get to, and Zhuanli is such a great organizer that it was probably the best way to go to the Gobi and get to some areas that I would imagine would be extremely difficult to get into otherwise. Even though my primary objective on this trip was to photograph patterns in the sand dunes, we did actually manage to find some trees surrounding some of the lakes that are kind of spread out throughout the area. Okay, driving over the sand dunes is really quite insane. The drivers that we have are very skilled indeed. It's quite funny. So we've come down to this dry lake bed, and it's just covered in this I guess it's salt. But there are actually, believe it or not, some trees here, and they're still alive. So I'm going to get my woodland photography fix. They're of course it's winter right now, so they're not in leaf, but they're all kind of contorted and twisted. I'm not sure what kind of trees they are, but the backdrop is just absolutely stunning because we have these kind of silvery hummocks that are kind of behind me here with vegetation on them, and then the trees themselves are quite twisted with this massive sand dune behind them. It almost looks like Namibia in some ways. I've never been to Namibia, but the images that I've seen, but just different. I think Alistair said the trees were tamarisk, so that would make sense. Anyway, I'm going to go and check these trees out and see if we can get a composition out of them. This lake bed is really quite unusual. Not an awful lot of wildlife around here. The other guys saw a fox this morning, and there are camels. There's a lot of camel poo, but we haven't seen any other than when we were driving in a couple of days ago. All right. of the most striking things about this area is just how quiet it is. It's just absolutely brilliant. Now, I think I might have found a composition already. There's a great grouping of trees. There's about 5 of them, and they're well separated. And of course, then they have that sand dune in the background, so it forms a nice clean background. And these silvery kind of sand dunes in the foreground here, I've got them quite low in the foreground, but what I'm going to do is blur them out. I think what I like about this image that I'm going to take is I'm just going to use a very shallow depth of field, so around f4, 5.6, just focus right on that grouping of trees and then have everything else around it quite blurry. And in the camera it looks really quite good. So I'll take this shot and then I'm going to try and get a little bit closer to the trees and see if I can get some more intimate views of these groupings. But yeah, it's really quite nice. Okay, up on the hills there, it was really cold, but down here there's hardly any wind, and man, it's heating up really quickly. And of course the sun's come out now. So I would imagine in the summer or in the spring this place is just unbearably hot, but in the winter of course it's very dry, but also gets very cold. It's quite unusual actually. The sand dunes themselves, the sand isn't that loose, it's quite solid, so they're easier to walk up, and that's because the water table is quite high here, and so the sand is more or less saturated with water. And actually there was some areas where it's really cold, you could dig down a little bit and you'll actually find frozen sand. It was quite interesting. But these the light is very flat, and there isn't a lot of color in this scene, but I don't know, it has a really nice appeal to it. After quite a bit of scrutiny and looking at these images quite closely, and then looking at the leaves on the ground and the kind of really rough bark on these trees, I think I came to the conclusion that these were actually more like cottonwoods. They reminded me of the Fremont cottonwoods found in the canyons in Utah. Now, as far as processing goes for these images, I really liked that muted kind of overall brown color from just the overall desert environment. So I tried to keep it as true to form as possible, and I didn't do an awful lot to these images. In most cases, I put a vignette around the outside of the frame just to draw your eye to the tree or the group of trees, and then I would brighten up the whites and also darken the shadows slightly, but not very much. The out of focus foreground I really quite liked, and I used that in pretty much all of these images. It really, for me anyway, it really directed my eye towards the trees and not so much in the foreground or the busyness of those areas. And in some cases there was little bunches of grass or foliage growing out of the dune in the background, and I just cloned those out just to kind of give it a cleaner background. Sadly, my series of videos about the Gobi are coming to an end. But before I leave you, I just wanted to show you a couple of images that you might find interesting in terms of processing. These two images here I took with a very long lens, 2 to 500 millimeter Nikon. And at the time the light was extremely flat and there wasn't an awful lot of light hitting these sand dunes. So I took some creative liberties here and brightened up the bright areas considerably and also darkened the shadows a lot to give it a lot more contrast. But what I noticed in the images was that there was a very slight blue cast in the sand dunes at the back and a warmer tone in the foreground. So I accentuated that by using a graduated filter in Lightroom and just giving it a slight blue cast to it to really dramatize that contrast. And I have to be honest with you, I really love these two images. They're fast becoming a couple of my favorites. It just goes to show that, you know, even in the flattest of light with a bit of manipulation in Lightroom and Photoshop, you can really make an image stand out. All right, everybody, thanks ever so much for watching these videos. I really hope that you enjoyed them. I have one more next week, Huangshan. We made another trip back, and I have a couple of images that are well worth looking at. So until then, please be sure to give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. And as always, if you enjoyed the content of my channel, be sure to subscribe. All right, thanks for watching. Bye for now.